Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this DevOps.com program, brought to you by Techstrong, AWS, and Sysdig. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting presentation ahead. First, I do need to cover just a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, maybe you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend. The on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you have any questions, and we really hope that you do, we want you to send those in to us using the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen. Right next to that Q&A tab, you'll find a chat tab, and we want you to reserve that for more general discussion or just letting us know from where you're tuning in today. If you navigate to the handouts section, you'll see a copy of today's slides that are available for download, so feel free to grab those. And of course, before we close out, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around for the duration of today's program. So the topic today is threat detection and response for AWS Fargate. And I'm joined by Eric Carter, Director of Product Solutions at Sysdig, and Ranjit Kalidasan, Partner Solutions Architect at AWS. Eric and Ranjit, thank you both so much for joining me today. Eric, do you want to go ahead and get this conversation kicked off?
Absolutely. And thank you, Cody, for the intro. What I wanted to do is take a quick look at the agenda. While I'm doing that, another little bit of insight about me. I'm part of the product team here at Sysdig, and I work with our partners like AWS to talk about the solutions that we bring to market. And so that's one of the things we're doing today is to focus on Fargate. And in a second, I'll hand it off to Ranjit. He'll talk a little bit about container challenges at scale. So some of the things that customers know and experience when they start moving into this cloud native space, and transition into talking about Fargate and what are some of the benefits of using this serverless compute approach to running your containers. And then Ranjit will pass it back to me, where I want to look at threat detection and response for Fargate, and what are some of the nuances when we're trying to understand, hey, what's happening to my container in a serverless type of environment. In doing that, I'll get a chance to introduce you all to Sysdig Secure. I'm going to do a demo at the end so that I can show you how the Fargate activity actually shows up. And then, great news, please do, as Cody suggested, ask questions, and we'll do Q&A at the end. So with that kind of intro, Ranjit, let me go ahead and pass it off to you to take us through the next piece here.
Cool. Thank you, Eric. Hello, everyone. My name is Ranjit Kalidasan. A quick introduction about myself. As Eric mentioned, I'm the Partner Solutions Architect working for AWS. I support partners like Sysdig in the security ISV space to make sure that partners are successful in using AWS, and also making sure that our customers are successful in using partner solutions like Sysdig. So I'm going to spend a few minutes here to just give a quick introduction about Fargate and its benefits, and then give it over to Eric. So before we talk about what is Fargate, right? What are the typical challenges in maintaining or managing the containers in cloud, right? So there are challenges that customers see in managing containers in cloud or on-prem, right from the security challenges, like they have to make sure that the container environment is free of any security vulnerabilities. They have some maintenance challenges on how they're going to do the AMI management. AMI stands for Amazon Machine Image. If they use cloud compute instances like AWS, they have to ensure that Amazon Machine Images or the image versions have been handled properly, and they have the right image in place, configure the logging and monitoring. They also have to ensure that there's sufficient capacity in place, and ensure that capacity management is done. There's also a cost concern where customers mostly want to pay for what they use rather than pay for what they provision, right? What are the resources they currently provision for managing your containers, right? So ultimately, it's all about customers focusing on what a business need rather than managing undifferentiated heavy lifting of the underlying infrastructure for containers, right? So this is where we introduce Fargate. Fargate gives a benefits of to customers to have AWS manage the the entire compute infrastructure for customers. It's a complete serverless service. So we manage the underlying EC2 instances, we manage the underlying networking, we manage the underlying security configuration. We ensure that you have the right platform configured to meet your container needs. So we also provide additional benefits to customers in terms of cost savings. Like with Fargate, customers can only pay for what they actually consume in terms of the compute capacity and an amount of memory and storage they consume, rather than actually pay for the underlying compute instances if it is running and with this no much of a continuous workload running. Right, this is a waste of cost for customers. So when you look at where does Fargate fits into our containers solutions, so before even talking about that, I have to introduce our two container solutions. We have Elastic Container Service and Elastic Kubernetes Service. Elastic Container Service, or ECS, is container engine, orchestration engine that has been built from scratch by Amazon Web Services, by our team. It is AWS created containers services to help customers to simplify the orchestration of container workloads in cloud. And Amazon Elastic Kubernetes Service, or EKS, what we call, is a container service using Kubernetes, open source Kubernetes engine. So we conform to the open source standards of Kubernetes. We use the curated open source Kubernetes engine with EKS. So one might ask, why do we need to use the EKS versus having them run their own native Kubernetes on EC2 instances? Well, customers can do that, but with the EKS, what we do is we manage the control plane operations. So we handle the control plane services for EKS. We ensure that the control plane nodes are distributed across AZs, ensure that it is scalable, and it's also configured in a way to provide a fault tolerance and manage all the underlying API operations. We handle the security aspects of the control planes, like patching the control plane nodes, so ensure that control plane is always available for customers. So that is the advantage of using EKS. And from a hosting perspective, customers have a choice to use Elastic Compute Cloud or EC2 instances where they manage the worker nodes or compute nodes for the containers. And with the AWS Fargate, even that is managed by AWS. So customers can only focus on writing the code for containers and just focusing on the business logic, rather than to worry about managing the underlying infrastructure. In terms of extensibility of the container services, we have ECR, or Elastic Container Registry Service. It's very similar to a GitHub repository, managed repository for containers, for container repository for Amazon AWS. We also have other services like AppMesh and the CloudMap. CloudMap is directory services for container services, and AppMesh provides networking services for the containers. So if you look at from a shared responsibility model view of the benefits of Fargate, if customers choose to manage run EC2 compute nodes for the containers, they have to manage right from the operating system stack to ensure that the operating system is patched and manage the runtime container environment there. But with Fargate, everything is managed by us. So the responsibility is further up the stack. So customers now only focusing on writing the containerized applications for their business needs. So to summarize the benefits of the Fargates, right? So customers don't have to manage any underlying operating system. So we manage all the components for running the container services. So Fargate provides up to 20 gig of FML storage for the applications. For any additional storage, so customers can use any additional storage they need. They have options of using Elastic file system, EFS storage, or additional ABS volume. But so 20 GB of the storage limit is what they get with Fargate, and they can extend it beyond their needs. And we also manage the underlying security operations of the compute environment, and making sure that the environment is patched, up to date, and free of vulnerabilities. So with that, I'll give it to Eric to talk about how Sysdig helps in managing Fargate.
Thanks, Ranjit. Appreciate the intro and appreciate you being here. And as I'm talking through, if you have any interjections, feel free to jump in. And again, thanks for everyone for being on. We're going to kind of shift now into talking about some of the nuances, as I mentioned, about securing Fargate and really focus in on the threat detection and response side. I wanted to just set the context quickly in one slide about Sysdig so that we kind of get this out of the way. You kind of know who we are. And ultimately, you think about Sysdig as a visibility and security solution for cloud and containers. And our goal, from the time folks who are working with Fargate or ECS or EKS or the developers building containers to run on these platforms, that they have the tools they need, things like vulnerability scanning. We won't be focusing too much on that side of it today, but that is a part and parcel to what Sysdig does, kind of more on the source side. And then when you're running, the watching for the bad things, right, that might be taking place, or at least things that deserve your attention. Again, whether that's looking at the cloud service itself or the actual workloads, containers, Kubernetes, and so on. And our goal is to kind of help you see across all so that you understand if there are risks emerging in any of those. We're doing more and more things around prioritizing what shows up so that you have a sense of, oh yeah, this is a serious issue versus this, which is potentially bothersome, but not as serious from a risk perspective. We are built on open standards, and by that, and I'll get into it in a second, things like Falco, open source, which is a project that we started and have contributed to the CNCF. Prometheus, Sysdig by the name is also an open source project. Things like OPA, right? And from our initial roots, we have grown into a full SaaS service that helps you get started quickly and grow without concerns for the back end and managing all of that stuff yourself. So what we're going to do is kind of get into the idea of the runtime threat detection with Fargate. And one of the things I wanted to start with is kind of what's different. What are some of the challenges? And I think when we think about seeing what's happening in your containers, a lot of the instrumentation that we've had for threat detection or intrusion detection has been very centered around hosts. And when we start moving into containers, 2, serverless compute, it's like chances are the tooling that you have isn't going to help you in the way that you want, right? You want to be able to understand not just is this container started or stopped, we want to know when this thing runs, is there anything that we need to understand that's happening beyond its intended workload. So getting visibility can be challenging. We'll talk about how to solve that in a second. Detecting specific threats, right? So how do you know what to look for without standing there and parsing through logs or manually? So how do we automate some of these detections and alerting so that the unexpected, or worse, the malicious activity is something that gets brought to our attention very quickly? And I'll show you how Sysdig does that in the demo. And then last but not least, something that Sysdig, kind of from our early days, we've been talking about is containers, the ephemerality of them. When they start, great, they're running, they're doing their thing, and when they stop, typically that's it, right? And unless you have extensive data and details and logs and so on, you may not understand what it is that took place during an incident. So do you have a way to capture that information? And we'll show you a unique way that Sysdig does that today in terms of solving this. So being able to see things, to know what it is that you're looking at that are threats, and to be able to go back and perform forensic. Those are all key things that can be a little bit more tricky when we're talking about a serverless environment and serverless environment with containers. So what do we need? And again, thinking about the running container, it's on Fargate. We're focused here on ECS. This is where the solution comes into play. What do you need? You need a way to observe the serverless container activity. And of course, you want to be able to set in some rules and policies so that you can automate the detection and be notified of the bad stuff, and not be notified if everything's going along fine. So how have we gotten there from the work that AWS and Sysdig have done together? Well, we have asked AWS early on, hey, is there a way? Yes, that we're not there to run an agent on a host, because there aren't any, at least not from the visible layer that is presented to us or to customers. Can we have a way to, at a low level, watch for activity? And the way that Sysdig does that is by observing system calls. Now think about that for those of you who are more, technical. Everything that starts on a Linux host essentially is making a system call of some sort, right? And from that, you can actually see, what is the activity that's happening with a container, between containers, et cetera, right? And so we needed a way to be able to do this even in a serverless environment. And so this facility for ptrace, there's sort of a longer syntax for it when you actually go to enable it. That's available now so that we can see and filter container activity for Fargate running containers. So that's a beautiful thing. It sort of helped us to apply what we do for standard ECS environments, what we do for standard EKS environments, any kind of container platform running on a Linux host. Now we can do that for a serverless environment running containers. And on the rules and policy side, that's where Falco comes in. And I'll explain it a little bit more, and then I'll show you kind of what that looks like as our SaaS solution is built on top of it. But Falco is an open source project. It has essentially become, I'm going to say, the de facto cloud native threat detection engine. There's companies, including AWS and many others, and developers and people who are out using it, contributing to it. And again, it's become the sort of base layer of this threat detection that we're doing around Fargate using the facility that I'm describing here. So we need a way to see things. Ideally, we need some policies in place to actually help us kind of set up the automation that we need. And this is where I want to introduce kind of how we're doing this. So I mentioned what Falco is. Think about it as a way to use and leverage a rich rule set, that rules being contributed, again, by community, by Sysdig, or you, because it's all based, it's essentially YAML based. It's using, again, that system call level layer. So anything that you can detect from that layer, you can essentially write a rule to detect it, and away you go. So it's very effective. This kind of, for Fargate, this kernel level, this ptrace facility is one level of insight that we get. Taking Fargate out of it for a second, let's say you're running EKS, you can also tap into and observe or set up policies to watch for Kubernetes things that are happening. And again, I'll show you this in the demo. Now, through what we call Falco plugins, you can actually even set up policies or rules to watch for CloudTrail things. So cloud logs, things happening with the AWS services themselves. I'll show you, like a cluster's been created or deleted or login without multi-factor authentication. So a lot of good things, right? So data sources become, very valuable here, but the layer of setting up policies and rules is also very valuable. On the Sysdig Secure side, we've used that, but we've also brought it into sort of more of a UI-based, at-scale, SaaS-based solution. And, for those that don't want to get into the syntax of things, can just turn buttons on or off, or you can go in and customize things. So there's a lot of out-of-the-box policies that are there for you. Again, I'll show you that. There's automated responses as is on the left side. You get the alert, and then what do you do? That's something that you build. On our side, the Sysdig Secure side, I should say, you can automate response like, hey, let's kill that container when this bad thing happens, or other things I'll show you in the demo. And then the other thing that we're doing is we're capturing an extensive activity audit. I'll show you that as well. And forensics captures. In a forensic capture, think about it as sort of a little system call recording of the before, during, and after of something that happens. So this applies to any of the container or Kubernetes or ECS environments you're running out there. It pertains to Fargate serverless running, in this case, with an ECS environment. And so it becomes a really effective way to actually achieve Fargate visibility. All right, so how does it work? Because again, there's two tenets we wanted to focus on. One is that we get the granular visibility so that you can decide the things to look for and see those things effectively. But two, we didn't want to force any, let's call it altering of your container images themselves, right? Let's let the developers contain or build the containers that they want to use, and then let's find a way in a serverless environment to establish what we need in order to achieve the level of visibility, alerting, and so on. So let me see if I can describe this effectively. So there are two main components on the Sysdig side, right? One is a slim workload agent, right? Which is in essence a sidecar container, but it's used to monitor the activity of a Fargate task. The second piece that you see here is an orchestrator agent. The word orchestrator, don't confuse that with Kubernetes or those kind of things, but think about it as Sysdig's way of kind of keeping track of the things happening that you want to keep track of in your Fargate environment, right? So it's a single point of collection for event data that's viewable by the Sysdig solution, so that can be seen in the Sysdig UI. It also manages all of the policy updates. So again, you're determining policies to use, whether you're just using the out-of-box stuff or customizing that. So the entire process then is automated for you, again, kind of around the clock with a CloudFormation template. Make sure all the right components are in place, they're available at the right time, and again, without modifying your container image at all, right? And so here's how it works. Like a Lambda macro is used to automatically, we use the word transform the Fargate workload CloudFormation template. And that's there to ensure that, again, the workload agent container is added to your task definition. So those using Fargate will kind of know that nomenclature, but just let's say that that's the thing that's saying, the workload that I want to run, the task that I want to run. What this means is that the user deploys the Fargate workload, the macro invokes the instrumentation, and then it ensures that you're up and running with the visibility from Sysdig, right? And it's all deployed with the task, right? So with this in place, what it means is that you can define the runtime security policies and capture information surrounding events, and you can do things like incident response, just as you could with any container workload in a traditional ECS or even EKS workload, right? So hopefully that makes sense. So we've tried to use the tools that AWS has made available to have this work in an automated fashion for customers that are putting more and more things onto a Fargate type of deployment. All right, and a couple other slides before I get into the demo. One is let's just kind of go top to bottom. So when we're thinking about AWS Fargate and Sysdig, and in general, for a moment, I would say we can even, just let's take Sysdig out of this for just a second, although we're providing all these things. One is clearly you want to be able to do things like scan your images before they run, right? That's table stakes these days, but anything that is critical or high, we're typically trying to fix before they run. So we do have an automated way for you to trigger scans for images using Sysdig tooling. And that makes it very clean and effective so that we know that the containers that are running are kind of where we need them to be. Detecting runtime threats, as we talked about. We're also, and I'll show you in a second, that when I talked about the data source of like CloudTrail along with the container insights, we can correlate the two things together. So I can see kind of activity that was taking place in my AWS account or accounts, and I can see the container things that are happening. And so sometimes what we can clearly see is, this thing happened where somebody has entered and now these things are happening with my containers. It can be very effective. And what you'll see as well is that there are some, compliance tags and compliance policies and things that you can put in place. What this means is that we've looked at the standards and we said, look, for something like PCI, watching for this particular activity, malicious or otherwise, is something that's important, an important control to put in place. And by doing that and watching for those things when an event happens or when an alert triggers, you can kind of get insight into, oh, okay, this could be critical for kind of our PCI based compliance and things we said we would do. So we need to look into it. Last but not least is that whole forensics side, right? So all of these are critical for customers running Fargate or any containers in the AWS, in the AWS cloud, and Sysdig can help you pull all of it together. Now, I just wanted to, before the demo, talk about one of our customers. I'm not going to name who it is, but it is a fairly sizable digital payments firm, and they have chosen to run a significant amount of their infrastructure on containers with a lot of things running as Fargate tasks. So here, like 800 Fargate tasks running at any given time. And again, their need, think about being in that payment industry, PCI compliance, and just like needing to keep the trust of your customers. They needed to make sure that they could see what was happening, even with Fargate containers that would run for a few minutes, right? And so Sysdig was able to provide that with them, as well as the surrounding context, right? They can see when anything was going on that surrounded this with using the insights coming from AWS CloudTrail. And then again, saying back to the folks that are, let's maybe call them auditors, or at least, the doing the due diligence, saying, hey, we have ways to see what's happening. We have ways to check that we're in compliance, and we have ways to investigate when something bad happens, right? And the good news for them is that it really made the job of securing the environment much more efficient. And their words, that it reduced their SecOps overhead by 50%. That's great. That's good, but almost the better part of it is that we can respond faster. There's nothing worse for these organizations that something happens and they're not aware, or they're aware, but they're having a hard time figuring out what it is that happened and responding. And then, some months later, we all get a letter in the mail saying there was an incident, right? They want to be able to manage those things much faster for reasons of reputation and otherwise just the security of our data. So this is where we can help. And what I want to do next is share my screen and just show you around a little bit in terms of how this manifests inside of Sysdig Secure, and to give you a sense of what I'm talking about in real life. All right, so I'm going to share this. Let me share. All right, and let me flip over. All right. We've landed on something we call insights. There's a few what we do try to do is bubble up the things that are taking place in the environment that really do deserve your attention. One way we do that, and this is brand new for us, is this kind of like roll up, and even what we call to do, which is saying, hey, there are some things that are happening, could be just latest in the industry, and some things that you need to fix. Compliance measurements, vulnerabilities that are happening, or other things, right? And so this is one way to get insights and information right across your entire estate. The other way is this kind of, again, this bubbling up, and you can, if you've got let's call it a multi cloud type of environment, you can dial in and say, show me what's happening across all of my AWS estate, right? Or even things like, dial back in time. So what we're looking at now are some of the events coming from CloudTrail. And this gives us some insight into the activity surrounding the things that I'm monitoring in my environment. And, things like, again, as I mentioned, deleting a cluster, logging in kind of without the kind of credentials that we want. And in any of these things, you can sort of dig in and see some of the details or look at individual events. This is coming from from the cloud security standpoint. You can also dial into something like Kubernetes activity, and again, see things like happening, whether it's on EKS or things running even around Fargate and so on, right? And this is all in the name of helping you, again, get to the things that matter most today, right now. This is being driven by this set of rules and policies. What I want to do first is essentially open up this rules library. So for those that choose to go the open source route, which is great, you'll see that a lot of them, we're going to focus on workloads right now since we're thinking about things like Fargate. You'll see all of these various available options for things to, detecting crypto miners or somebody trying to delete their bash history. That's one of our favorite demos. And all sorts of things. And let me click on something here as I go down just to show you, like malicious process detected. So what does that look like? So Falco, in essence, I'm going to go full screen here, see if we can get a little more real estate, right? Malicious. So what does Falco look like? You have sort of the rule name, the description of what the rule is, but then you have the conditions that you want to look for. And this is where you can use what's here, or you can customize, to look for malicious processes and things. And so you can kind of roll your own, in essence, but these are all done with kind of macros and things like that. And then you get some level of output with insights that you want. Tell me when this does trigger all sorts of things, including login ID and username and so on, right? And those are the kind of things that you can get passed back to you. And what we've done is, we've taken these things and built them into what we call, on the Sysdig Secure side, policies, right? And again, I'm going to focus on workload policy since we're talking about Fargate here. This just look like this one here, Fargate log4j. This is one we built for our demo environment. And here we've stacked a bunch of rules together. So a policy on the Sysdig Secure side is not just one Falco rule equals one policy, but you can say, well, at the same time, these things, when they happen, all matter, let's say maybe together, right? And so what that means is we can make a multifaceted rule that helps to watch for various things. And you see modifying binaries, creating files below, or writing below root, clearing log activities. That's something we do not want. And then in essence, the policy itself is something that, so I've clicked into sort of the edit policy mode here, is that you can apply to a very specific sort of slice of your environment. Or maybe I say, I want this to apply everywhere, right? My entire infrastructure. Or maybe I wanted to apply this to a specific, container type, right? So maybe there's some container image or container things that, very specifically, only for this particular one, right? If we're talking about something like the Kubernetes environment, you can also say things like, only apply this to a specific, Kubernetes cluster, and you'll get your sort of pick list of things to do, and you can dial in like AWS is the one that I want to apply this to, and away we go. So now from there, of course, we want to be notified. That's kind of what's down here, and we've plugged in a few things that you can use for that, but you can use Splunk and PagerDuty and so on. And I mentioned this, which is I want, maybe when something is bad enough that when we encounter it, we want to stop that, right? And here, killer stop, it's whether we're doing it with the container engine or Kubernetes, because we can immediately end that threat, right? And the orchestration will keep us running, and then that's a good thing. And then the last thing here is we want to make sure we have the insights that we need, right? So here we have this idea of a capture. And again, I said it captures the before, during, and after. So you can say, give me 10 seconds before and 20 seconds after. So what this is useful for is you can see what were the steps that were taken before this thing was actually, then the thing was done that was detected. And then is there any kind of like exit stuff that went on so that we can put the picture together. And I'll show you the level of detail in just a second. So let's say we've done that. Again, the set of policies, we can turn them on or off. And we can use the out-of-the-box things. Some of these are based around certain compliance standards, things like suspicious container activity. If I want this one on, I can, again, turn it on and then go through that process. So then we're looking for those events either in the bubbles that I showed you at the beginning, or we can go in and maybe on an individual basis. And here I've filtered for Fargate. Let's say I want to look during a certain period when something happened. This is good for my demo. So let's go down here. So I'm seeing all these things. These are various things that happened, right, that are very Fargate specific for me. I can also do things like, I don't want to see all the low stuff. I just want to see the real juicy stuff, right? And so from here, let's pick one of these that's in my AWS environment. I can see this, right, which I get what happened, right? What was it that got triggered? Who did it? Where was it kind of in and around the cloud? So I can see that this happened in the East region where I'm deployed with AWS. If it's running in a particular type of container environment, what are the details of where, not just like the cluster, but down to even things like pods and so on. And then things like where's the container ID, even down to a process name. So in this case, somebody's gotten into a container and they're doing something like running commands, right? Now, for me, I'd be curious, like, what was it, right? What are they up to? Well, that's where you can go over here to this kind of respond button, and you can view various kind of elevations of detail. So I'm going to view activity audit. We get dropped right into this particular event. And in activity audit, we're showing you things like commands, network activity, Kubernetes commands or activity, and then any file activity, right? And we get that all captured here in a way that lets us be able to go in and dive through and see kind of what was it that happened. We can, kind of dig into all of the details, right? And what this lets us do is to kind of really understand at a finer grain level what happened, right? I'm going to look at another one here. Got a lot of stuff here. All right, well, let me go back. What I want to show you then is if I go back to that Fargate view that I had, right? I want to get back to things like, again, so again, you see some of the things that were triggered here. I want to go back into like this one here, right? And I want to see a capture. So what is a capture? A capture is that before, during, and after recording of all of the things that happened so that I get a sense and I can reconstruct really what happened. So here, like in this one, I want to know what were the commands that were issued. Potentially, I want to understand things like were any files messed with, and certain things like connection. So I can see in this particular file, the most of what happened is centered around this particular duration of this file. So I can then sort of start sorting through or cast out some of the things I don't care about, and then go into like particular investigation, right? I want to see, okay, so now from this point of view, again, think about this particular event had to do with someone connecting to a container, running commands, and doing things that potentially we don't want them doing, right? And right now we see at a detail level sort of what happened. They got in, they can see that here there was a tar file or that was there, was unzipped, right? And then in the end, anyone who knows it, like they tried to shred their bash. So in other words, hide their track. That looks sketchy. What's really cool here, and this is where I'll essentially wrap up, is that I can even look at what with this file, what's in it, right? I can look at it as printable ASCII, and I can go through and kind of get an idea of what were they doing? What was this all about, right? So what becomes effective here is we really need to know we have everything that we need in order to know, right? And that's what the forensic side, the capture side of Sysdig and these capture files. So let me just quickly go back and summarize what we're looking at here with Sysdig here. We're looking at a way to set policies in order to watch our Fargate environments. We are able to see insights about Fargate and the cloud so that we can see what's happening together. We looked at specific events, so maybe a security operations center, and being able to dive in. And then we looked at ways to investigate the bad thing that happened. You may not always use this, but there may be times when you need to, right? There's more. I'm not, just by the sake of time, we won't go into it. But you see here, we talked about, you can scan for vulnerabilities. We even have things to check your environment and get certain benchmarks and so on. So for those of you who are curious, I would encourage you to check out more if you have the opportunity. So let's do this. Let me return to the slides. I'm going to stop my share, go back in to our open. All right. So thanks, everyone. Bear with me just a second. Let me move forward. Okay, so just look, quick summary. Why are Ranjit and I here together? Why does AWS work with Sysdig? Really, for those of you who are moving in this direction, and many are, and the growth is incredible, we were moving to cloud and containers. We want to help you with kind of a single view of risk about what's happening across these environments, and especially where Sysdig is super, super strong is just around this securely running containers. And AWS helps you with the platforms for that, with all of the right kind of, let's call it discipline and care for those environments. And with Fargate, you get to just think about containers. And the things that we looked at today is applicable to Fargate. It's applicable to your ECS environments, and it's applicable to your Kubernetes and EKS environments. And so, if you remember nothing else, think about, AWS and Sysdig work together to help you secure your running containers and understand it at a fine level what's happening. And that's valuable for today's enterprises. So having said that, I'm going to land on this page, and we'll get ready for questions. A few resources for you to think about here while we start looking at the questions, which is, we have a page dedicated to AWS at sysdig.com. You can learn more. You can get started on AWS Marketplace. And of course, there's a free trial. Having said that, let's dive into any Q&A. Cody, can I ask you back on?
You absolutely can. So let's just take them from the top. How does this compare to other solutions for Fargate?
Yeah, good question. Some of the security tooling that you've been used to using can't support Fargate at all. But of course, we're not necessarily the only game in town. I want to say that, but I would say that the place to compare us, or what makes us special, is that Falco engine, is that flexibility of being able to essentially set up rules and policies that can pretty much see anything that you want to see. And that's what our customers appreciate, because not every environment is the same. You also want to know under the hood, what is it? What this rule or policy, how does it work? What makes it tick? And all of that is fully visible to you. So I would argue that we, in terms of the level of visibility, the flexibility of how we do runtime security for Fargate, is second to none in the industry. Okay.
So can I add my own custom detection policies for Fargate?
Yeah, and I think we nailed that, or I nailed that in what I just said a second ago. And the answer is absolutely yes. You can customize to your heart's content, and it's pretty easy to do so. Look, if you know how to deal with YAML or what I showed you on the screen there, which is not hard, then I think that you can do this very effectively.
Do you have any examples of forensic tasks made possible by Sysdig regarding Fargate?
Yeah, well, I sort of looked at that toward the end, and that is like, okay, somebody got in and ran commands and pulled in some files, right? Or it could be pulled out, right? And so what you want to know is not just they got in and they ran commands. What were the commands that they ran? What were the files that they brought in or took out, right? That's half of the battle. And not just file name, the contents of that file. So that's an example of a forensic exercise. Sometimes you might want to be looking at, where did these connections come from, right? And so on. And so what I didn't focus on, because I went very quickly, and my apologies, is that all of those little boxes, when we got to looking at the inspect or the capture file, everything is sort of like, organized in a way that says, okay, you want to look at the commands, click and double click on this. If you want to look at the files deleted, double click on this. You want to look at the network connections, double click on this. So, it could go any which direction, but that just gives an example of how you dig in.
So this question reads, can we look for specific users in captures command?
You can, provided that that information was not masked in some way. But I think that you can get at that information. And I think in the activity audit, which I went into, I know in some of our examples, and we have in the demo environment, and they didn't have it for this Fargate one, like we've put the infamous, you'll like this, Cody, the infamous Jane Doe in there. And so you can see from that perspective, you can click and say, oh, it was Jane Doe who did this particular activity. That was another view at the top level that there are some views based on users. And usually I say something like, oh, I see that Ranjit has been in here doing some things. Ranjit's a good guy. Maybe I just need to go have a conversation with him about best practices. Other times you may see something like, I have no idea why this user's here or who they are, right? So those levels of insight are available.
It's always Jane and John Doe that are always up to something, though.
Or Ranjit.
All right. Well, what do I need to get started with this integration?
I'm gonna make Ranjit answer something. How do I get started with Fargate? Not even Sysdig. Just what do I need to do Fargate?
Just go to AWS console and start deploying a cluster on Fargate. That's that easy. Use console or CLIs to do the Fargate deployment. It's an option where you can select whether it's going to be a Fargate deployment or it's going to be a managed compute nodes, right? I don't want to get into the details, but you do have option to do both.
Yeah. And one good thing on the Sysdig side, we've again tried to make it easy. There's a CloudFormation template to help you just get all the right things in place. It's not complicated at all. Another way to get started, and I'll point people to the slide here, is within minutes you can have a Sysdig account and play with that for 30 days. I like to tell people that before I got hired, I was asked to do that. So in other words, I needed to be able to prove that I could get in and experience the magic, because and the good news is it's very, very easy to do. So that's another way. There's actually a get started piece of, when you first get in, if you've never done anything and you're entering for the first time, get started and you can click and find I'm going to do it in this environment with AWS, and boom, you have what you need to get started very easily.
All right, so while we wait for any more audience questions to come in, I'm going to go ahead and give away a couple of gift cards. So these are for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. Our winners are Todd B, Navneet T, Jim S, and Rick B. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card, but if you don't happen to see that email, do check your spam folder. I'll also take this opportunity to remind everyone that our conversation today was recorded. So maybe you had to leave early or maybe you joined us late. You can rewatch. It will be available shortly after we conclude today, and you should receive an email with a link to access. All right, Eric, Ranjit, are you seeing any more questions coming in through the chat or the Q&A panel?
I think we're good for now.
All right. Well, if there's anything that the two of you would like to leave our audience with before we go off the air, I do give you the microphone once more.
Just to thank you for spending time with us. I know it's hard to attend these things these days. We're all so busy. And so we appreciate it. And one of our goals is to help save you time. So if you adopt something like what we're doing, hopefully that becomes true for you. Ranjit?
Yeah, same here. Thanks for attending. Go try Fargate or container services. That's all I want to say here.
Awesome. Well, Eric and Ranjit, thank you both so much. I would like to thank AWS and Sysdig for sponsoring today's program, and to everyone in our audience that attended live and joined us today for the past 50 or so minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate and value your time, and we just want to ask for one extra moment of your time for a survey that will pop up on your screen as soon as we close out. Otherwise, we do hope to see everyone at an upcoming Techstrong Learning program. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. And Eric, Ranjit, thank you again.
Thank you.